Welcome to EcoElsa, and on today's episode we'll be covering the basic strategies for class management outdoors. So let's get started. So the kind of class management we'll be covering today is mostly proactive versus reactionary to what's already happening in the class. I have found after years of teaching outdoors that if you're more proactive with class behavior and management outdoors, it goes a lot more smoothly and it's a much better class to teach. So the first step will be setting the tone for your outdoor classroom. You can do this by reiterating that the outdoor classroom is the same as the indoor classroom, and we have some of the same rules. Now, you may have to tweak some of your classroom rules. So say you have a rule about respect and the students respecting each other, and you, the teacher, will add on to that respecting nature, being respectful of the trees and the animals they encounter in their outdoor classroom. You may also have to add on a couple of additional rules or expectations for being in the outdoor classroom. This could be anything like you must remain within earshot and eyesight of the teacher at all times. In the outdoor classroom, you kind of have to worry about your students running away from you. You got this whole big open space and they don't know what to do with it sometimes. So setting those boundaries is a good one. The students can help with this. Say you have your kind of expectations and your rules and how they're going to apply to the outdoors, and have a class meeting about this before you go outdoors and ask the students if they think there should be any other expectations for while they're outdoors. They can also help by maybe making a board. So say you have a board and you have all of the different rules laid out there. Maybe you add a couple more, and the students help decorate and color this board. And then the students can take turns carrying this board out with you when you go outdoors. That way it's out there leaning against a tree when you need it. But this is just one strategy for setting the tone for your outdoor classroom. Try to keep these rules and expectations at about 5 rules, no more. Honestly, the perfect number is 3. When there's even 5 rules, kids sometimes will forget 1 or 2 of them. And at the places I've worked at, these rules can be kind of summed up into 3 areas. So the first one is the expectation of respect, so respecting the teacher, respecting your fellow classmates, and respecting nature. The second kind of expectation is following the teacher's instructions and directions, so making sure they're listening to the teacher and doing as the teacher asks them to. And the third is be safe, learn lots, and have fun. So the places I've worked at have had some kind of version of these 3 rules. I do feel that they're a really good, just basic, here's what the expectations are for being outside, but do what makes sense for you in your class. And one of the best things for this is taking the rules you have inside and applying them to outside. Keeping that consistency will help them remember it better outdoors and indoors. So the second class management strategy is being preventative. If there's something about the location that you've picked for teaching outdoors that you believe your students may struggle with once they get out there, talk about it ahead of time. Maybe it's staying away from or out of the pond. Whatever it is, talk about it with your students ahead of time. And then the second you get there, remind them, hey, we're going to leave the pond alone. Now, even with your best planning, sometimes you get out into the field and there's something that takes you by surprise that your students just get really into, and it's probably not something that they should be really doing. Making sure you're being preventative and stopping the students immediately and talking about it is a lot better than just letting it go on for about 10 minutes and then finally bringing the students in, because you're going to kind of confuse them a little bit. So part of this is you're stopping class, you're gathering the students all together, and if you have time, you talk about what it was they were just doing and see if you can lead them to the realization that it wasn't meeting their expectations. So say they were jumping between logs and it's not meeting your expectation of being safe in your outdoor classroom, then you ask prodding questions until you lead the students to the, oh, that's not safe, we shouldn't do it. They're going to remember this a lot better than if you just kind of tell it to them. Unfortunately, though, if you're kind of strapped for time, you might have to just tell it to them. You don't have to make a big production out of this either way. In fact, it's a lot better if you don't make a big production out of it. Just, hey guys, is jumping between logs kind of unsafe? You're up off the ground pretty high, and what happens if you don't land on the next log? Oh, we're being unsafe, we could get hurt. There you go. And you move on. So, okay guys, logs jumping off limits. This brings us to outdoor class management strategy number 3. So, discipline. Now, when you're in the outdoor classroom, similar to the indoor classroom, you need to make sure that whatever your consequences are for whatever it was the student was doing wrong, that the punishment fits the crime. This is because students are very aware if things are unfair and if not all of the students are being held to the same standards. So you can do yourself a big favor by making sure you're being consistent with your messaging of what the rules and the expectation are, but also the consequences for breaking those rules and expectations. Personally, my strategy for discipline outdoors is the 3 strikes method, and it's always worked very well for me. Here is how it works. If you want to use it, feel free to. The very first strike is just a warning. You're just reframing and you're re-summarizing like, hey, you're not meeting this expectation, so one of the expectations we set, please correct the behavior, so I'm going to give you the chance to fix the situation, or if you don't, this is what's going to happen. If the student doesn't correct the behavior and they keep doing, this is when the second strike comes in. So this is now there's going to be a little bit of a consequence. The consequence could be sitting out of an activity for a few minutes until they get their stuff together, or it could be sitting out for the whole activity, depending on the severity of what it was they were doing. The third strike is sitting out the whole activity or being sent inside. This is you've given them 2 chances, they're still doing it, they got a bigger consequence. Now, as you can see, the reason why I partly like the 3 strikes method is because it allows for some flexibility. Depending on what it was the students were doing wrong, it allows you to adapt the consequences to quote-unquote fit the crime. So for example, if the students were doing something really dangerous, let's say they were misusing a bow and arrow, or maybe they were going too deep into a river, these things are dangerous. There could be potentially tragic outcomes for the student doing them and not listening. So after you're giving them a warning and they don't correct their behavior, this is a scenario where I would probably pull the kid out of the activity. And there's a good chance if we have other activities that day outdoors, I probably have them sit out all of that activity. Because since what they're doing could really hurt themselves or another student, or possibly deadly in some cases, you don't want them doing it. You really want to show them, hey, I mean business. This is not something I want you doing in my class, and if you can't follow it, you're going to be going inside right away. You kind of upgrade the second strike to fit that because you don't want them to get hurt. Now, when I'm saying a strike and you have the kids sit out, how this works is you'll have the kids sit out for maybe a few minutes or maybe the whole activity. They're going to sit out and they're going to think about what it was they were doing, why it was wrong, why they shouldn't be doing it, what expectations they were breaking, or what consequences could have happened if they kept doing it, and then how they're going to correct the behavior. Now, you don't need to make a big production out of this. As said before, if you make a big production out of it and the student has an audience, that might aggravate the situation. So if you can talk to the student one-on-one, away from the other students, have the other students do something else, have them tell you why it was wrong, what expectation were they breaking, how they can correct the situation, and that they're going to listen to you and do this. Once again, as stated in a previous video, this take a break method works better when your class is staying in an area for a while. This is why when you're first starting to go outside, if the first few times you have the class staying in a certain area, it'll work a lot easier as you're fine-tuning class management skills outdoors. The reason I like the 3 strikes method and the take a break method is because it's very consistent and it's very good at de-escalating the situation. The students clearly have outlined for them what are going to be the consequences, and you remind them throughout it. And the years that I've been using the 3 strikes method, I've only ever had students get to strike number 3 times, and twice it was with the same student. So if that shows you anything, it's that this is a very successful strategy and it can work for you. However, if you have a strategy that you already use in the classroom that you think will work very well outdoors, by all means use it, because if you're keeping it consistent using the same discipline strategy indoors as outdoors, it'll be easier for your students to remember it. So the 4th strategy for teaching your class outdoors some of you teachers you might not be the biggest fan of, but it's called picking your battles. So there's a lot of things outdoors that can be potentially distracting for your students. There's leaves and sticks and rocks to play with. There's animals and plants and things to be like, teacher, 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 there's an eagle, while you're trying to teach. When it comes to all these things, you kind of have to group them into 3 areas. One area being it's not something super disruptive, it's just something really annoying to you. They're shuffling their feet in the leaves and stuff, something that's just annoying and makes it hard for you to concentrate while you're teaching. The second kind of area is things that are actually disruptive to the class. It's the pointing up at an eagle up in the sky and yelling out there's an eagle. The third area is things that could be potentially dangerous. Your students are picking up sticks, and depending on how they're using them, could be dangerous. You could hurt another student, or they could hurt themselves. Don't poke your eye out, kid. So that's kind of how you group them into 3 areas. You can talk to your students about this grouping and how you're going to respond to each thing. That way they're aware of, oh, I'm shuffling my feet in the leaves, the teacher's going to make me stand. Keep in mind that you're going to have to tolerate some of these things, that if you were trying to control all of these different factors and things, you'd be constantly yelling at the students and not teaching, which is not going to be fun for you, and it's not going to be fun for them. The big thing is to keep safety in mind. So if these things fall into the area where they could be potentially dangerous, you're going to want to nip them in the butt a lot more than the things that are simply annoying to you. And now part of this is you don't have to get to discipline right away, because there's other strategies you can use to get the students to behave in a way that you would prefer them to behave in for the class. So say your students love sticks. You can incorporate them into the class by saying they're exploring sticks. The students only get to have a stick in their hand when they are exploring for an activity, and if they're not using their exploring stick the way that they're supposed to be using it, you're going to have to take it away, and they're not going to get it for the rest of the class period outdoors. You can try and incorporate them into a lesson. So your students are really big into the rock skipping. Come over to them and be like, guys, I didn't want to tell you, but next week we are doing a class on the math of rock skipping. And if you skip all these rocks into the lake, then we're not going to have any good rocks for our class next week. And the students will be like, oh no, no good rocks. And what they'll do, it's really funny, they'll start hoarding the rocks. They'll start hiding them and burying them like treasure, because they don't want their friends to get the best rocks, or they want to be able to have the best rocks for their class next. So the 5th and final class management strategy outdoors is attention grabbers and how to gather your students as a group outdoors. The key thing here is to make them fun. If you make them fun, it'll be a lot easier to get the students to cooperate and do what it is you really want them to do, while they think they're playing a fun little mini game. One of the very common problems that's kind of luckily enough to have when teaching outdoors is that you get your students doing an activity and they get really into it, and they do not want to stop doing it. They don't want to come together for a discussion, they don't want to move on to the next activity, and they don't want to go indoors. So you're going to have strategies for how to gather them together and how to get their attention, like a herd of cats, and get them indoors. One of my first attention grabber and gathering students techniques is called magnetic elbows. Now how it works is, if you have older kids, or maybe you just have kids that aren't really keen on holding hands to get into a circle, is you yell out magnetic elbows, and all the students need to, before you finish counting down, come and lock their elbows together, like elbow to elbow, like they're magnets. It's kind of a fun, quick little game for them to play, and you can get them into a circle without them even kind of realizing it. No hand holding necessary, they don't have to be uncool. Another tip and technique for getting students' attention and gathering them together is called animal calls. I'm sure you've probably seen the viral video of the teacher going, "Caca, caca," and his kids responding back, "Caca, caca," and them all gathering together. So this could be any animal, you don't have to do crow. Some big highlight animals to do are wolves. Unfortunately, that screech noise that red-tailed hawks make, but children think bald eagles make, and dolphin calls. Start working on your animal noises to gather your students together. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. So stay tuned for next week's video on attention grabbers, gathering your students' tips and tricks, and fun games to play with your students while hiking or walking between locations. If you liked this video, please like it or subscribe below to get more awesome videos like this. As always though, I post new videos on Wednesdays. Teachers, if you really liked this class management stuff for outdoors, please share what was your favorite, and if you have any other tips and tricks you like to use to manage your classroom. So as always, I hope you have a great week. I will see you all next week. Be Be safe, learn lots, have fun, and get your kids outdoors. Bye!